Hey guys, tonight we're diving into the gritty, smoky trenches of World War I, where you'll uncover what soldiers ate to survive the chaos of the Great War. Picture yourself huddled in a muddy dugout, the air thick with cordite and damp earth, as you pry open a tin of questionable meat. Feeding millions in a war zone was a logistical nightmare, and honestly, you probably won't survive the taste. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your city and local time. I'm curious where you're drifting off from tonight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're in a British trench on the Somme, 1916, and your stomach's growling louder than the distant artillery. British soldiers, or Tommies, relied heavily on bully beef, canned corned beef that's salty, fatty, and about as appetizing as wet socks. It's your main protein, slapped into a tin to survive the journey from London to the Western Front. Over 2 million tons of canned food sustained British troops during the war, a testament to industrial ingenuity. You're prying open a tin with your bayonet, the metal lid stubborn, and the smell hits you meaty, but not exactly gourmet. A quirky tidbit, some soldiers swore the tins were recycled from old paint cans, leaving a metallic tang. Historians still argue whether bully beef was a lifesaver or a morale killer, its monotony grinding down even the toughest Tommies. The trench is damp, rats scurrying over your boots as you scoop the beef onto a chunk of bread. It's cold, congealed, but you're starving, so you choke it down. You're sharing the tin with a mate, his face smudged with mud, joking about how this stuff could stop a German bullet. A grim chuckle hits you. Why don't Tommies play food critic? Because every meal's a tin of regret. Your canteen's got lukewarm water, barely masking the taste, and you're wondering how anyone fights on this diet. The beef's often paired with a slice of plum and apple jam, a sugary blob that's more apple than plum, but it's a rare treat. You're dodging a shell's rumble, the trench walls shaking as you eat. Bully beef was a staple because it didn't spoil, even in the mud-soaked chaos of Flanders. You're picturing a modern burger joint, greasy, but heavenly. This is just survival fuel. Another joke. What's a Tommy's favorite recipe? Open tin, pray, eat. Some soldiers heated the beef over a candle, turning it into a greasy stew. But you're too tired for that. You're thinking of those Viking feasts from another history trip meet, and roast boar sound like a dream compared to this. Night's falling, and you're curled up in the dugout, the empty tin at your feet. The rats are eyeing it, and you're too exhausted to care. A quirky story floats up. Some Tommies traded bully beef with French locals for wine, a rare win in the trenches. You're wondering how these men kept going, their spirits buoyed by letters from home promising real food. Another dark joke, what's a bully beef fan's favorite hobby? Not eating, because it's all they dream about. You're starting to see why food was more than fuel. It was a lifeline, the taste of survival in a world of mud and guns. You're still in that damp British trench on the Somme, the metallic tang of bully beef lingering on your tongue as you reach for something to crunch. The air's heavy with smoke, and your stomach's rumbling again. British Tommies didn't just live on canned meat. They had another staple, hardtack biscuits. Those tooth-breaking slabs of flour and water, and tea brewed in the grimiest conditions. You're holding a biscuit, its surface like concrete, wondering if it's food or a spare helmet. Feeding an army in 1916 meant portable, long-lasting rations, and hardtack was the king of durability. Over 500 million biscuits were shipped to British troops during the war, enough to pave a crunchy path from London to Berlin. A quirky tidbit, some soldiers called them dog biscuits, swearing they were better for throwing at rats than eating. Historians still argue whether hardtack was a vital calorie source or a dental disaster that crushed morale as much as teeth. You're tapping the biscuit on the trench wall, trying to crack it without losing a molar. It's stale, tasteless, but you soak it in your tin mug of tea, hoping it softens. The tea's brewed over a tiny fire, the water murky from a nearby puddle. But it's hot, and that's enough. You're sharing the mug with a Tommy, his hands black with mud, grinning about how tea's the only thing keeping him sane. A grim chuckle hits you. Why don't Tommies play bakery? Because their bread's harder than the Kaiser's heart. The tea's bitter, leaves floating like tiny ships. But it warms your core in this soggy hell. The trench smells of wet earth and smoke. Shells rumbling in the distance. You're nibbling the softened biscuit. Crumbs sticking to your fingers, and it's like chewing cardboard. Hardtack's meant to last months. But it's so dry you're coughing up dust. You're picturing a modern cookie chocolate chip. Gooey, not this wartime brick. Another joke, what's a hardtack fan's favorite dessert? Anything that doesn't fight back. Some soldiers ground the biscuits into a porridge with bully beef. But you're just dunking and praying. You're thinking of that Somme bully beef tin greasy. But at least it didn't threaten your jaw. Night's creeping in, and you're huddled by the fire. The tea's warmth fading. Rats are eyeing your biscuit crumbs, and you're swatting them away. A quirky story floats up. Some Tommies carved their initials into hardtack, hoping to sign their misery before eating it. You're wondering how these men kept their humor, swapping stories of home-cooked meals, roast beef. Not this. The tea's gone cold, but you're sipping anyway, the ritual grounding you. Another dark joke. What's a Tommy's favorite tea party, one where the biscuits don't win? You're starting to see why tea and hardtack were more than food. They were a taste of routine, a moment of normalcy in a world of chaos. The stars are hidden by clouds, and you're wrapping your coat tighter, the empty mug at your feet. The trench is quiet, save for a distant cough and the rustle of rats. You're exhausted, your jaw aching from the biscuit. But the men around you are already prepping for tomorrow's fight. You're thinking of those Viking longships from another tale wild. But they had fresh fish. Here, it's just hardtack and hope, keeping you alive one crunchy bite at a time. You've left the Somme's muddy trenches behind. The crunch of hardtack still echoing in your jaw as you find yourself in a French trench near Verdun. 1916. The air smells of damp wool and gunpowder, and you're huddled with poilus, French soldiers, sharing a crusty loaf of bread and a splash of red wine. Your stomach's grumbling, and you're tearing off a piece of the bread. Its texture rough but comforting. French troops relied heavily on bread pain de guerre, or war bread, as their dietary cornerstone, with each soldier allotted about 750 grams daily when supplies held. Wine, often diluted, was a staple too, boosting morale in the grim trenches. A quirky tidbit, some poilus claimed their wine rations were laced with brandy to keep them fighting, though it was likely just cheap vin rouge. Historians still argue whether France's bread and wine diet fueled resilience or masked logistical strain as the war dragged on. You're sitting on a crate, the trench walls slick with mud, As a poilu passes you a tin cup of wine, it's sour, more vinegar than vintage, but it warms your throat in the chilly air. The bread's dense, made with coarse flour, and you're chewing slowly, savoring the faint yeastiness. A mate jokes in rapid French, his mustache flecked with crumbs, about how this bread could double as a shield. A grim chuckle hits you. Why don't poilus play baker? Because their loaves are tougher than German bunkers. You're sipping the wine, its tang cutting through the bread's dryness, and you're wondering how these men march on such simple fare. The trench rattles with a distant shell, and you're brushing crumbs off your coat. Bread was baked in field ovens when possible, but it often arrived stale, forcing you to dunk it in wine or water to make it edible. You're picturing a modern baguette crisp, golden, not this wartime brick. Another joke. What's a poilu's favorite sandwich, one that doesn't fight back when you bite it? Some soldiers carry a heel of bread in their packs, a last resort when rations run low. You're thinking of those British hardtack biscuits, brutal, but at least they didn't mold like this bread sometimes does. Night's falling, and you're leaning against the trench wall. The wine's faint buzz softening the cold. Rats scurry nearby, eyeing your crumbs, and you're kicking them away. A quirky story floats up. Some poilus traded bread for German cigarettes during rare truces. A fleeting taste of peace. You're wondering how these men kept their spirits, dreaming of Paris cafes while gnawing stale loaves. The wine's gone, your cup empty, but the ritual of sharing feels like a lifeline. Another dark joke. What's a French soldier's favorite vintage? Anything that's not trench water. You're starting to see why bread and wine were more than sustenance. They were a taste of home, a reason to keep going. The stars are dim through the smoke, and you're wrapping your scarf tighter. The empty cup at your feet. The trench is quiet, save for a poilu's soft humming and the rustle of gear. You're exhausted, your hands sticky with crumbs, but the men around you are already prepping for tomorrow's fight. You're thinking of that British bully beef greasy, but reliable. Here, it's bread and wine, carrying you through the Verdun night, one bite and sip at a time. You're still in that Verdun trench. The faint tang of red wine lingering as you huddle closer to a small fire flickering in a French dugout. 1916. The air's thick with smoke and the earthy scent of simmering broth. You're clutching a tin bowl, steam rising from a watery soup that French poilus have cobbled together from whatever's at hand. Soups and stews were a lifeline for French soldiers, often made from tinned meat, stale bread, and scavenged vegetables when luck allowed. Over 60% of French rations included some form of hot meal, even in the chaos of the Western Front. A nod to their culinary roots. A quirky tidbit, some poilus swore they tossed trench rats into the pot for extra protein, though it was likely just a grim joke. Historians still argue whether these makeshift meals boosted French morale or merely highlighted the desperation of wartime scarcity. You're stirring the soup with a bent spoon, chunks of bully beef and soggy bread floating in a thin broth. A poilu next to you, his coat patched, grins as he tosses in a wilted carrot, probably nicked from a nearby farm. The soup's bland, but it's hot, warming your hands through the tin. A grim chuckle hits you. Why don't poilus open a restaurant? Because their soup's more survival than Michelin's star. You're sipping carefully, the broth scalding but grounding, and you're wondering how this watery mix keeps men fighting through Verdun's hell. The trench hums with distant artillery, and you're crouched low. The fire's glow casting shadows on the muddy walls. Vegetables were rare, so this carrot's a luxury, maybe bartered from a local. You're picturing a modern ramen bowl, spicy. Rich, not this sad slurry. Another joke, what's a Poilu's favorite ingredient? Dope. Because it's all they've got. Some soldiers thicken their soup with crushed biscuit crumbs. A trick you're trying, but it just tastes like wet dust. You're thinking of that Somme hardtack tough, but at least it didn't dissolve like this bread. Night's settling in, and you're slurping the last of the soup, the bowl's warmth fading. Rats are sniffing around, drawn by the scraps, and you're swatting them with your boot. A quirky story floats up. Some Poilus claimed they could tell a trench's safety by the soup's smell too good. And a shell was coming. You're wondering how these men found comfort in such meager meals, sharing stories of home-cooked feasts while licking their spoon. The fire's dying, and you're leaning back, the empty bowl at your feet. Another dark joke, what's a French soldier's favorite soup, one that doesn't run out before the war? You're starting to see why these stews were vital, not just food, but a fleeting moment of warmth in a cold, brutal world. The stars are hidden by clouds, and you're pulling your coat tighter. The trench quiet except for a Poilu's soft snoring. You're exhausted, your stomach half full. But the men around you are already bracing for tomorrow's fight. You're thinking of that British bully beef greasy, but simple. Here, it's soup. A fragile ritual holding you together through Verdun's endless grind, one spoonful at a time. The lingering taste of broth is a small victory. Proof you're still alive in this muddy chaos. You've left the warmth of Verdun's watery soup behind. The broth's faint comfort fading as you find yourself in a German trench near Ypres, 1915. The air's damp, smelling of mud and stale smoke, and you're clutching a dense slice of black bread, its crust rough against your fingers. German soldiers relied heavily on this Kommissbrot, a rye-based loaf designed to last weeks in the trenches. Your stomach's grumbling, and you're tearing off a chunk. Its weight like a brick in your hand. Over 3 million tons of bread were supplied to German troops during the war. A backbone of their diet despite growing shortages. A quirky tidbit, some soldiers claimed the bread was so hard they used it as a pillow before eating it. Historians still argue whether Kommissbrot's durability was a logistical triumph or a symbol of Germany's strained wartime economy. You're sitting on a sandbag. The trench wall's cold and slick. As a German soldier beside you, his helmet dented, passes you a knife to cut the bread. It's chewy, almost sour, with a gritty texture that sticks to your teeth. He mutters about missing his mother's sourdough, his breath visible in the chilly air. A grim chuckle hits you. Why don't Germans play baker? Because their bread's tougher than a U-boat. You're washing it down with a swig of water from your canteen. The bread's heaviness sitting like a stone in your gut. And you're wondering how these men march on this alone. The trench shakes with a distant shell, and you're brushing crumbs off your coat. Black bread was baked in massive field ovens. But by 1915, flour shortages meant it was often mixed with sawdust or potato starch, making it even denser. You're picturing a modern pretzel salty, soft, not this wartime slab. Another joke, what's a German soldier's favorite snack? Anything that doesn't need a hammer to eat. Some soldiers spread the bread with a thin smear of margarine, but you're eating it plain. The rye's bitterness lingering. You're thinking of that French trench soup, thin, but warm, while this bread's like chewing regret. Night's creeping in, and you're leaning against the trench wall, the bread's weight anchoring you. Rats are sniffing around, drawn by the crumbs, and you're kicking them away. A quirky story floats up. Some Germans carved messages into their bread, hoping to pass notes to comrades or even taunt the enemy. You're wondering how these men kept their spirits, dreaming of beer and bratwurst while gnawing this loaf. The trench is quiet, save for a soldier's cough and the rustle of gear. Another dark joke: what's a Commisbrout fan's favorite hobby? Jaw exercises, because they need them. You're starting to see why black bread was more than food. It was a stubborn act of endurance, a bite of survival in Ypres' grim slog. The stars are dim through the smoke, and you're wrapping your scarf tighter, the half-eaten bread tucked in your pack. You're exhausted, your jaw aching from chewing. But the men around you are already prepping for tomorrow's fight. You're thinking of that British hardtack brutal, but at least it didn't taste like sorrow. Here, it's black bread, a heavy reminder of home's distance, carrying you through the night, one tough bite at a time. The trench's cold seeps into your bones, but the bread's in your belly. Proof you're still here. You're still crouched in that Ypres trench, the dense aftertaste of German black bread lingering as you fumble with a tin mug in the dim light of 1915. The air's sharp with frost and the faint burn of gunpowder, and you're sniffing a steaming brew that smells more like dirt than coffee. German soldiers, strapped for supplies, turn to ersatz coffee makeshift substitutes brewed from roasted grains, acorns, or chicory roots to keep their spirits up. Your hands are cold, clutching the mug, and you're wondering if this murky liquid will warm you or just make you grimace. By 1916, Germany produced over 200,000 tons of ersatz substitutes as blockades choked off real coffee imports. A quirky tidbit: some soldiers swore their ersatz brew was spiked with sawdust, giving it a gritty crunch. Historians still argue whether ersatz coffee was a clever workaround or a bitter reminder of Germany's wartime desperation. You're sipping the brew. Its taste earthy and slightly sour, like a cruel prank on your taste buds. A German soldier nearby, his scarf wrapped tight, chuckles about missing Berlin's cafes, his breath fogging in the chill. The mug's warmth is a small mercy, but the flavor's a far cry from anything you'd call coffee. A grim chuckle hits you. Why don't Germans play barista? Because their coffee's more punishment than perk. You're swirling the mug, sediment settling at the bottom, and you're wondering how this stuff fueled men through Ypres' endless nights. The trench hums with a distant shell's rumble, and you're huddling closer to a makeshift stove, its glow flickering on the muddy walls. Ersatz coffee was boiled in communal pots, often using water from shell craters, adding a metallic tang. You're picturing a modern latte frothy, sweet not this sad sludge. Another joke: what's an ersatz coffee fan's favorite blend? Misery, with a hint of regret. Some soldiers mixed in sugar scraps to mask the taste, but you're drinking it straight, the bitterness clinging to your tongue. You're thinking of that French trench soup, watery, but honest, while this brew feels like a lie. Night's settling in, and you're leaning against a sandbag, the mug's heat fading. Rats are sniffing around, drawn by the faint, grainy smell, and you're shooing them off. A quirky story floats up: some Germans traded ersatz coffee with British troops for cigarettes during rare lulls, a fleeting barter for comfort. You're wondering how these men kept going, dreaming of real coffee while sipping this grim substitute. The trench is quiet, save for a soldier's muttering and the creak of boots. Another dark joke, what's a German soldier's favorite brew, one that doesn't taste like defeat? You're starting to see why ersatz coffee was more than a drink. It was a stubborn ritual. A sip of defiance in a war that starved the soul. The stars are lost in smoke. And you're pulling your coat tighter. The empty mug at your feet. You're exhausted. Your throat raw from the brew. But the men around you are already bracing for dawn's fight. You're thinking of that German black bread heavy, but filling while this coffee's just a ghost of comfort. The trench's cold bites deeper, but the mug's lingering warmth is a small victory. Proof you're still awake, still here, one bitter sip at a time. You're picturing those British trench teas, murky, but reliable, wishing for a taste of something real. You've left the bitter dregs of ersatz coffee in that Ypres trench, the muddy chill fading as you find yourself in a bustling American camp near the Marne. 1918. The air smells of canvas and cooking grease, and you're digging into a tin plate piled with food that's a cut above the usual trench slop. American soldiers, or doughboys, enjoyed a more varied diet than most. Thanks to the U.S. Senate, Zeitz has a late entry and robust supply lines. Your fork's loaded with canned beef, beans, and a slice of soft bread. And you're marveling at the luxury of it all. Over 4 million tons of food were shipped to American troops during the war, ensuring fresher rations than their allies. A quirky tidbit, some doughboys carried emergency rations in tiny tins, nicknamed goldfish for their sardine-like contents. Historians still argue whether America's generous rations gave them a combat edge or just made them homesick for mom's cooking. You're sitting on a crate, the camp alive with chatter and the clink of mess kits. A doughboy next to you, his helmet tipped back, grins as he scoops up beans, joking about how this beats his farm slop bucket. The beef's tender, not like that British bully beef, and the beans are savory, spiced with a hint of molasses. A grim chuckle hits you. Why don't doughboys play chef? Because their kitchen's an ocean away. You're chewing slowly, the bread's softness a shock after those German black bread bricks, and you're wondering how these men fight so hard on such hearty fare. The camp's edge hums with distant artillery, but you're focused on the plate, a rare moment of calm. Supplies came straight from U.S. farms, so you're tasting corn-fed beef and wheat from the Midwest. You're picturing a modern diner burgers. Fries, not this. But it's close enough to feel like home. Another joke, what's a doughboy's favorite buffet, one where the cans don't fight back? Some soldiers drizzle syrup on their bread. A sweet touch you're trying, and it's like a hug from across the Atlantic. You're thinking of that French trench soup, warm, but thin, while this meal's a feast by comparison. Night's creeping in, and you're scraping the last beans from your plate. The camp's fire's casting a warm glow. Flies are buzzing, drawn by the food, and you're swatting them away. A quirky story floats up. Some doughboys traded their extra rations with French kids for apples. A taste of civilian life. You're wondering how these men kept their optimism, swapping tales of backyard barbecues while eating by lamplight. The plate's empty, your belly full, and you're leaning back, content. Another quiet joke. What's an American soldier's favorite hobby? Eating. Because it's the only war they're winning. You're starting to see why food was a doughboy's anchor, a taste of abundance, a reminder of why they crossed the sea. The stars twinkle above the camp, and you're pulling your blanket tighter. The empty plate at your feet. You're tired, your hands sticky with syrup, but the men around you are already joking about tomorrow's march. You're thinking of that German ersatz coffee grim, gritty while this meal's a small triumph, proof of America's might. The camp's quieting, save for a harmonica's soft tune and the rustle of tents. You're savoring the fullness, a rare gift in this war, carrying you through the Marne night, one hearty bite at a time. You're lingering in that American camp near the Marne, the savory beans still settling in your stomach as you reach for a small, shiny wrapper glinting in the firelight. 1918. The air's warm with the hum of soldiers' chatter, and you're unwrapping a piece of chocolate. Its sweetness a rare jolt in the grim routine of war. American doughboys were spoiled with morale-boosting treats like chocolate bars and chewing gum, luxuries that set them apart in the trenches. Your fingers are sticky as you pop the chocolate in your mouth, and you're grinning like a kid on Christmas. Over 300,000 pounds of chocolate were shipped to U.S. troops during the war, a deliberate effort to keep spirits high. A quirky tidbit, some doughboys traded chocolate for French kisses, literal ones with local girls, or so the camp rumors went. Historians still argue whether these treats gave Americans a psychological edge or just made them miss Holmes' candy stores more. You're leaning against a tent pole, the camp's fires crackling, as a doughboy beside you chomps on gum, snapping it loudly. The chocolate melts on your tongue, rich and sugary, a far cry from that German ersatz coffee's bitterness. He offers you a stick of gum, boasting it's better than his mama's pie. A quiet chuckle hits you. Why don't doughboys play candy shop? Because they'd eat the stock before selling it. You're chewing the gum now. Its minty zing waking you up. And you're wondering how something so small lifts men through the Marne's chaos. The camp's edge echoes with a distant shell. But you're focused on the wrapper, its foil catching the firelight. Chocolate came from companies like Hershey's, packed in sturdy bars to survive the Atlantic crossing. You're picturing a modern candy aisle, Snickers. Reese is not this simple square, but it's heaven here. Another joke, what's a doughboy's favorite dessert? One that doesn't come with trench mud. Some soldiers save their chocolate for tough days. But you're savoring it now, the sweetness drowning out the war's grim drone. You're thinking of that French trench bread stale. But honest, while this treat's a burst of joy, night's falling, and you're pocketing the gum for later. The camp's glow softening. Flies are buzzing, drawn by the sugar, and you're swatting them off. A quirky story floats up some doughboys mailed chocolate wrappers home. Proof they were eating better than their allies. You're wondering how these men stayed hopeful, trading gum for laughs while shells fell nearby. The camp's quieting, your jaw working the gum, and you're leaning back, content. Another soft joke, what's an American soldier's favorite trade gum for a smile? Because it's always a win. You're starting to see why chocolate and gum were more than snacks. They were tiny escapes, a taste of normalcy in a world of guns. The stars are bright above the camp, and you're pulling your blanket tighter, the empty wrapper tucked in your pocket. You're tired, your mouth still sweet, but the men around you are already planning tomorrow's push. You're thinking of that German black bread heavy, grim while this chocolate's a fleeting gift, proof of America's care. The camp's soft hum, with a soldier's harmonica in the distance, lulls you. You're savoring the gum's last burst, a small victory in this war, carrying you through the Marne night, one sweet chew at a time. You've left the sweet buzz of American chocolate behind in that Marne camp. The gum's minty tang fading as you find yourself trudging through a snowy forest near Tannenberg. 1914. The air's biting, thick with pine and the distant crack of rifles, and you're clutching a crust of dark bread, its edges frozen in your hands. Russian soldiers, battered by war's early chaos, survived on a sparse diet of bread and porridge, the barest fuel for their grueling marches. Your stomach's a hollow pit, and you're breaking off a piece of the bread, its texture gritty and cold. Russian troops consumed over 2 million tons of grain-based rations during the war, but supply lines often faltered, leaving men hungry. A quirky tidbit, some soldiers claimed their bread was baked with dirt to stretch the flour, giving it an earthy crunch. Historians still argue whether Russia's meager rations crippled their early campaigns, or if poor logistics were the real culprit. You're crouched by a smoldering campfire, the forest's chill seeping through your coat, as a Russian conscript beside you stirs a pot of kasha buckwheat porridge, its steam faint in the frost. He mutters about missing his village's dumplings, his breath clouding. The bread stale, almost rock hard, but you're chewing doggedly, the grain sticking to your teeth. A quiet chuckle hits you. Why don't Russians play baker? Because their bread's more weapon than food. You're scooping a spoonful of kasha, its warmth a brief relief, and you're wondering how these men fight on such thin sustenance. The forest creaks with falling snow, and you're huddling closer to the fire, the bread's weight heavy in your gut. Supplies were hauled by horse carts, but Tannenberg's chaos often left them stranded, forcing you to ration every crumb. You're picturing a modern soup, hot, hearty, not this watery porridge. Another joke, what's a Russian soldier's favorite meal? One that actually arrives. Some men mix snow into the kasha to stretch it, but you're eating it plain, the buckwheat's nutty taste barely masking the hunger. You're thinking of that American chocolate sweet, indulgent while this bread's a grim reminder of scarcity. Night's closing in, and you're scraping the last of the kasha from the pot. The fire's glow dimming. Wolves howl in the distance, drawn by the camp's scraps, and you're gripping your rifle tighter. A quirky story floats up. Some Russians carved prayers into their bread crusts, hoping for divine protection. You're wondering how these men kept marching, dreaming of borscht while gnawing frozen loaves. The camp's quiet, save for a conscript's cough and the crunch of boots in snow. Another soft joke, what's a Russian soldier's favorite hobby? Dreaming of dinner. Because it's all they've got. You're starting to see why bread and porridge were more than food. They were a stubborn grip on survival. A bite of hope in Tannenberg's frozen hell. The stars are faint through the pines. And you're wrapping your scarf tighter. The empty pot at your feet. You're exhausted, your jaw sore from the bread. But the men around you are already prepping for dawn's retreat. You're thinking of that German ersatz coffee bitter, fake while this kasha is at least honest in its simplicity. The forest's cold bites deeper, but the porridge's faint warmth lingers, proof you're still here. You're picturing those French trench soups, thin, but shared, wishing for a taste of something more, carrying you through the night, one gritty bite at a time. You're still shivering in that Tannenberg forest, the gritty kasha barely warming your bones as you trudge deeper into the Russian lines. 1914. The air's sharp with frost and the tang of pine, and you're scavenging through a snowy clearing, your eyes scanning for anything edible. Russian soldiers, plagued by crumbling supply lines, often turn to foraging to survive. Hunting for berries, roots, or even moldy grain abandoned in villages. Your hands are numb, digging through frozen dirt for a shriveled turnip. And you're wondering if this is dinner or desperation. Over 30% of Russian troops faced severe food shortages by late 1914, forcing reliance on the land. A quirky tidbit, some soldiers claimed they ate tree bark boiled into a bitter broth, swearing it kept them alive. Historians still argue whether foraging prolonged Russian resistance or exposed the army's logistical collapse. You're crouching by a frozen stream, a conscript beside you cracking ice to fish out a rotting potato. He mutters about his farm's harvests, his face gaunt under a tattered cap. The turnip's bitter, half frozen, but you're gnawing it anyway. The crunch loud in the quiet forest. A quiet chuckle hits you. Why don't Russians play farmer? Because the only crop here is hunger. You're brushing snow off a handful of sour berries. Their tang sharp, and you're wondering how these scraps fuel men against German guns. The forest hums with distant rifle fire, and you're moving low, clutching your rifle. The turnips wait a small comfort in your pocket. Foraging meant stealing from farms or bartering with wary locals. But winter left little to find. You're picturing a modern grocery store apples. Bread not this desperate hunt. Another joke, what's a Russian soldier's favorite harvest, one that doesn't shoot back? Some men boiled grass with their kasha. But you're sticking to the berries, their juice staining your fingers. You're thinking of that American chocolate sweet. Easy while this foraging feels like a losing battle. Night's falling, and you're back at the campfire, sharing the potato with the conscript, its flesh mealy but warm. Wolves prowl closer, drawn by your scraps, and you're kicking snow to scare them off. A quirky story floats up: some Russians swapped bayonets for bread with villagers, a risky trade under fire. You're wondering how these men kept going, dreaming of feasts while eating roots. The camp's silent, save for a soldier's shiver and the fire's crackle. Another soft joke, what's a forager's favorite hobby? Hoping. Because it's all they've got left. You're starting to see why foraging was more than survival. It was defiance. A refusal to starve in Tannenberg's grip. The stars are dim through the trees, and you're huddling closer to the fire, the turnip gone. Your stomach still growling. You're exhausted, your hands raw from digging. But the men around you are already planning tomorrow's retreat. You're thinking of that Russian bread stale, but steady while these scraps are a fleeting win. The forest's cold claws at you, but the berry's faint sweetness lingers, proof you're still alive. You're picturing those French trench soups shared, warm wishing for a taste of something solid, carrying you through the snowy night, one scavenged bite at a time. You've stumbled out of Tannenberg's icy foraging grounds, the bitter turnip's aftertaste fading as you find yourself scaling a rocky slope in the Isonzo Valley. Italy, 1916. The air is sharp with pine and the distant crack of Austro-Hungarian artillery. You're crouched with Italian alpini, your hands clutching a stale chunk of bread, your stomach aching for the pasta they talk about like a lost love. Italian soldiers dreamed of hearty pasta dishes, spaghetti, ravioli, but in the trenches, their diet was meager, mostly bread and tinned meat. You're tearing off a piece of the bread, its crust gritty, and you're wondering if you'll ever taste the meals these men crave. Over 1.5 million tons of rations were supplied to Italian troops during the war. But mountainous terrain often delayed deliveries. A quirky tidbit, some Alpini carried tiny pasta makers, hoping to cook noodles over campfires, though flour was scarce. Historians still argue whether Italy's poor rations weakened their campaigns, or if the soldiers' grit compensated for empty bellies. You're perched on a rocky outcrop, the wind howling, as an Alpini beside you, his feathered cap dusty, shares a story of his nonna's lasagna. His eyes distant, the bread's dry, almost choking you. But you're chewing doggedly, imagining a plate of steaming pasta with tomato sauce. A quiet chuckle hits you. Why don't Alpini play chef? Because their kitchen's a cliff and a dream. You're sipping from a canteen, the water cold, and you're wondering how these men climb mountains on such thin fare. The slope trembles with a shell's rumble, and you're ducking low. The bread clutched tight. Rations were hauled by mules, but many perished on treacherous paths, leaving you with scraps. You're picturing a modern Italian trattoria Alfredo. Garlic bread, not this wartime crust. Another joke. What's an Alpini's favorite dish, one that doesn't slide off the mountain? Some soldiers boiled bread into a mush with tinned sardines. But you're eating it plain, the grit sanding your teeth. You're thinking of that Russian kasha sparse, but warm, while this bread's a cold reminder of hunger. Night's creeping in, and you're huddling in a shallow trench. The bread's crumbs scattered on your coat. Flies buzz, drawn by the faint food smell, and you're swatting them away. A quirky story floats up. Some Alpini sang opera while eating, turning meager meals into a stage. You're wondering how these men kept their spirit, dreaming of pasta while gnawing crusts. The trench is quiet, save for a soldier's hum and the wind's moan. Another soft joke. What's an Italian soldier's favorite hobby? Imagining dinner, because it's all they've got. You're starting to see why pasta dreams were more than food. They were a tether to home. A bite of hope in Isonzo's rocky hell. The stars gleam faintly through the peaks. And you're wrapping your scarf tighter, the bread half-eaten in your pack. You're exhausted, your jaw sore from chewing. But the men around you are already prepping for tomorrow's climb. You're thinking of that American chocolate sweet, indulgent while this bread's a grim necessity. The mountain's cold bites deeper. But the thought of pasta lingers, proof you're still here. You're picturing those French trench soups shared, simple, wishing for a taste of something warm, carrying you through the Isonzo night, one dry bite at a time. You're still clinging to that rocky Isonzo slope. The stale Italian bread, a fading memory as you trek across a muddy Austro-Hungarian outpost near Gorizia. 1916. The air's thick with smoke and the faint spice of simmering stew. And you're spooning a bowl of goulash, its warmth a rare comfort in the chill. Austro-Hungarian soldiers relied on this hearty mix of meat, potatoes, and paprika, a nod to their empire's diverse cuisines. But war made it scarce. Your hands are wrapped around the bowl, the broth's heat seeping through, and you're wondering if this spicy slop can fuel another day's fight. Over 2 million tons of food were distributed to Austro-Hungarian troops. But supply lines often crumbled under the strain of multi-front wars. A quirky tidbit, some soldiers claimed their goulash was spiced with gunpowder to fire them up, though it was just a campfire tale. Historians still argue whether these traditional meals preserved morale or highlighted the Empire's fractured logistics. You're crouched by a flickering fire, the outpost's tents flapping in the wind as a Hungarian soldier beside you, his mustache flecked with broth, boasts about his mother's goulash, rich with beef. This version's thin, with stringy meat and a lone potato chunk. But the paprika's kick warms your throat. A quiet chuckle hits you. Why don't Austro-Hungarians play cook? Because their stew's more hope than flavor? You're slurping carefully, the spice tingling, and you're wondering how this watery mix keeps men marching through Gorizia's mud. The ground shakes with a distant shell, and you're huddling closer to the fire, the bowl's warmth a shield against the cold. Goulash was cooked in mobile kitchens when possible, but shortages meant it was often just tinned meat and whatever roots soldiers scrounged. You're picturing a modern chili thick, bold, not this diluted broth. Another joke, what's a soldier's favorite spice? Desperation. Because it's always in the pot. Some men toss in wild herbs, but you're eating it plain. The paprika's heat a faint echo of home. You're thinking of that Italian bread dry, grim while this goulash feels like a small victory. Night's falling, and you're scraping the bowl's last drops. The fire's glow dimming, flies buzz, drawn by the stew's scent, and you're swatting them off. A quirky story floats up. Some Austro-Hungarians traded goulash for Italian cigarettes during lulls. A taste of peace. You're wondering how these men kept their grit, dreaming of Budapest's feasts while sipping broth. The outpost's quiet, save for a soldier's cough and the wind's howl. Another soft joke, what's a goulash fan's favorite hobby? Licking the bowl. Because every drop counts. You're starting to see why goulash was more than food. It was a spark of culture, a sip of survival in Gorizia's chaos. The stars are faint through the smoke, and you're pulling your coat tighter, the empty bowl at your feet. You're exhausted, your lips still tingling from paprika. But the men around you are already bracing for dawn's march. You're thinking of that Russian kasha sparse, cold while this stew's a fleeting warmth. The mud's chill seeps in, but the goulash's spice lingers. Proof you're still here. You're picturing those American chocolates sweet, easy wishing for a taste of something richer, carrying you through the Gorizia night, one spicy spoonful at a time. You've left the spicy warmth of that Austro-Hungarian goulash behind in Gorizia's muddy outpost. The paprika's kick fading as you find yourself in a sun-baked Anzac camp on Gallipoli's shores. 1915. The air's thick with salt and the crackle of a campfire. And you're biting into a hard, golden Anzac biscuit. Its sweet crunch, a taste of home for Australian troops. Your hands are gritty with sand, and you're savoring the biscuit's oaty sweetness, wondering how this treat lifts spirits amid the cliff's grim chaos. Australian soldiers relied on these biscuits, baked by families and shipped across oceans, alongside tinned meat and bread. Over 20,000 tons of biscuits reached Anzac forces, a lifeline from down under. A quirky tidbit, some soldiers claimed the biscuits were so tough they doubled as writing boards for letters home. Historians still debate whether Anzac biscuits were a vital morale boost or a bittersweet reminder of distant loved ones. You're sprawled on a rocky beach, the sea lapping nearby, as an Aussie digger beside you diggers, his slouch hat tilted, passes you another biscuit, joking about his mum's recipe beating the armies. The biscuit's chewy, packed with oats and golden syrup. A stark contrast to the tinned bully beef you're used to. A quiet chuckle hits you. Why don't Anzacs play Baker? Because their biscuits are tougher than Turkish snipers. You're washing it down with a swig of brackish water, the sweetness lingering. And you're wondering how these men charge cliffs on such simple fare. The camp vibrates with distant gunfire, and you're brushing sand off your coat, the biscuits' crumbs drawing ants. Biscuits were shipped in airtight tins, but heat turned them rock hard, forcing you to soak them in tea if you had any. You're picturing a modern cookie chocolate dipped, soft, not this wartime slab. Another joke. What's an Anzac's favorite dessert, one that doesn't swim in dysentery? Some diggers mixed biscuit crumbs with jam for a makeshift pudding. But you're eating it plain, the oats grounding you. You're thinking of that Austro-Hungarian goulash spicy. Thin while this biscuit's a sweet anchor. Night's creeping in, and you're leaning against a crate. The biscuit's tin glinting in the firelight. Flies buzz, drawn by the syrupy scent, and you're swatting them off. A quirky story floats up. Some Anzacs sent biscuit crumbs home in letters, a taste of Gallipoli for their families. You're wondering how these men kept their humor, dreaming of barbecues while crunching rations. The camp's quiet, save for a digger's laugh and the waves' rhythm. Another soft joke. What's an Anzac soldier's favorite hobby? Chewing, because it's their only workout. You're starting to see why these biscuits were more than food. They were a thread to Australia, a bite of resilience in Gallipoli's hell. The stars twinkle above the sea, and you're pulling your blanket tighter, the empty tin at your feet. You're exhausted, your jaws sore from the biscuit's crunch. But the men around you are already planning tomorrow's assault. You're thinking of that Russian kasha grim, sparse while this biscuit's a fleeting joy. The beach's chill seeps in, but the sweetness lingers. Proof you're still here. You're picturing those Italian bread crusts dry, hopeless wishing for another biscuit, carrying you through the Gallipoli night, one crunchy bite at a time. You've left the sandy crunch of Anzac biscuits on Gallipoli's shores, the sea's salty tang fading as you find yourself in a muddy British trench near Arras. 1917, surrounded by Indian troops. The air's damp, laced with smoke and a faint whiff of spice. And you're scooping a steaming curry from a tin plate, its heat a fiery jolt in the cold. Indian soldiers brought their vibrant cuisine to the Western Front, eating curries made from tinned meat, lentils, and whatever spices they could muster. Your mouth tingles from the chili, and you're wondering how this bold meal fuels men so far from home. Over 140,000 Indian troops served in Europe, consuming an estimated 50,000 tons of specialized rations tailored to their diets. A quirky tidbit, some sepoys carried tiny spice pouches, sprinkling turmeric into trench slop like a secret weapon. Historians still debate whether these familiar flavors strengthened Indian morale or deepened their homesickness in alien mud. You're crouched by a smoldering fire, the trench walls slick, as a Punjabi soldier beside you, his turban dust-streaked, shares a tale of his village's feasts, his eyes bright. The curry's thin, mostly lentils and a shred of tinned beef. But the spices cumin, chili dance on your tongue. A quiet chuckle hits you. Why don't sepoys play curry chef? Because their kitchen's a war zone. You're tearing a piece of chapati, it's flatbread chewy, to scoop the curry, and you're wondering how this taste of India survives Aras's gloom. The trench shakes with a shell's rumble, and you're huddling closer to the fire, the plate's warmth a shield. Spices were shipped from India, but shortages meant curries were often just a faint echo of home. You're picturing a modern biryani, fragrant, rich, not this wartime mush. Another joke, what's an Indian soldier's favorite spice, courage? Because it's in every bite. Some sepoys mix tinned rations with wild herbs, but you're eating it straight. The chilies burn, cutting the cold. You're thinking of those Anzac biscuits, sweet, tough, while this curry's a fiery lifeline. Night's settling in, and you're scraping the last of the curry. The fire's glow fading. Rats scurry, drawn by the spicy scent, and you're kicking them away. A quirky story floats up. Some sepoys traded curry for British cigarettes, a fleeting bond across cultures. You're wondering how these men kept their spirit, dreaming of Delhi's markets while eating in mud. The trench is quiet, save for a soldier's hum and the wind's moan. Another soft joke, what's a sepoy's favorite hobby, hafernense? Because every spice tells a story. You're starting to see why curry was more than food. It was a spark of home, a bite of pride in Aris's grim fight. The stars are dim through the smoke, and you're wrapping your coat tighter. The empty plate at your feet. You're exhausted, your mouth still burning. But the men around you are already bracing for dawn's push. You're thinking of that Austro-Hungarian goulash, spicy, thin, while this curry's a bold memory of India. The trench's chill bites deeper, but the chili's warmth lingers, proof you're still here. You're picturing those Russian berries sour, desperate, wishing for another scoop of curry, carrying you through the Aris night, one fiery bite at a time. You've left the fiery curry's warmth in that Aris trench. The spices tingle, fading as you find yourself in a muddy Canadian outpost near Passchendaele. 1917. The air's thick with rain and the greasy scent of cooking, and you're digging into a tin plate of bacon and beans. Its hearty bulk, a welcome weight in your hands. Canadian soldiers leaned on these filling staples, often paired with bread or biscuits, to power through Belgium's quagmire. Your forks loaded with smoky bacon, and you're wondering how this simple meal keeps men slogging through mud. Over 600,000 Canadian troops served, consuming roughly 200,000 tons of rations, with bacon a prized protein. A quirky tidbit, some Canadians called their bacon saubali, swearing it was fatty enough to float in trench floods. Historians still debate whether Canada's robust rations fueled their battlefield grit, or just cushioned the misery of Passchendaele's mire. You're crouched by a sputtering fire, the outpost's duckboard slick, as a Canadian private beside you, his coat soaked, jokes about his ma's baked beans beating this army slop. The bacon's chewy, its saltiness mingling with the bean's sweet tang. A far cry from that Indian curry's fire. A quiet chuckle hits you. Why don't Canadians play cook? Because their kitchen's a swamp. You're mopping up the beans with a chunk of bread, its crust soft, and you're wondering how this hearty plate fuels men through shell fire. The outpost shakes with a distant barrage, and you're huddling closer to the fire, the plate's warmth grounding you. Bacon was shipped in tins or slabs, often fried over open flames, filling the air with a homely smell. You're picturing a modern breakfast, pancakes. Syrup, not this wartime heap. Another joke, what's a Canadian's favorite meal, one that doesn't sink in the mud? Some soldiers mixed beans with biscuit crumbs for extra bulk. But you're eating it straight, the bacon's grease coating your lips. You're thinking of those Anzac biscuits, crisp, sweet while this dish is pure, rugged fuel. Night's falling, and you're scraping the last beans. The fire's glow dimming. Rats scurry, drawn by the grease, and you're kicking them off. A quirky story floats up. Some Canadians traded bacon for French wine during lulls, a taste of cheer. You're wondering how these men kept their humor, dreaming of farm breakfasts while eating in slime. The outpost's quiet, save for a private's whistle and the rain's patter. Another soft joke: what's a Canadian soldier's favorite hobby? Eating. Because it's the only warm thing here. You're starting to see why bacon and beans were more than food. They were a stubborn comfort, a bite of home in Passchendaele's hell. The stars are lost in clouds, and you're pulling your coat tighter, the empty plate at your feet. You're exhausted, your mouth salty. But the men around you are bracing for dawn's push. You're thinking of that Italian bread dry, hopeless while this meal's a small triumph. The mud's chill bites, but the bacon's warmth lingers. Proof you're still here. You're picturing those Russian berries desperate, cold, wishing for another forkful, carrying you through the night, one greasy bite at a time. Wind down as you lean back in that Passchendaele outpost. The rain softens to a gentle drizzle, the fire's last embers fading into the night. The taste of bacon and beans lingers, a quiet anchor, as the war's distant rumble grows fainter, like a storm passing over. You let the weight of trenches, tinned rations, and muddy marches slip away, each breath slower, deeper, as the Great War's stories dissolve into a warm haze. The mud, the cold, the hardtack, they're just whispers now, carried off by the wind. You're safe, wrapped in the present, where the only battle is for a soft pillow. Sink into the stillness. Let the fans hum, cradle you, and drift gently into sleep. The soldier's meals, a distant, savory dream. You've drifted from the greasy comfort of Canadian bacon and beans in Passchendaele's mud, now finding yourself in a cramped trench near the Somme, 1916, where soldiers from different nations share their cooking tricks. The air's thick with smoke and the faint sizzle of improvised meals. And you're watching a British Tommy heat a tin of bully beef over a candle. Your hands are grubby, holding a makeshift spoon, and you're wondering how these hacks turn grim rations into something edible. Soldiers across the Western Front developed clever ways to stretch their food. From jury-rigged stoves to bartered spices, over 70% of trench meals relied on such ingenuity to make tinned rations bearable. A quirky tidbit: some Tommies used rifle oil cans as frying pans, claiming it added a battle tang to their food. Historians still debate whether these cooking hacks boosted morale or merely masked the monotony of wartime diets. You're crouched by a tiny fire, the trench walls damp, as a French poilu shows you how to crumble hardtack into a tin of sardines for a makeshift pâté. His grin's wide, despite the mud on his face, joking about his cafe dreams in Paris. The beef's greasy, melting into a warm sludge, and you're spreading it on a biscuit, its warmth a small win. A quiet chuckle hits you. Why don't soldiers play gourmet chef? Because their stove's a bomb crater. You're tasting the mix, the sardines' saltiness cutting through, and you're amazed how these scraps feel like a feast. The trench rattles with a shell's echo, and you're huddling closer to the fire, the candle's flame flickering. Cooking meant scavenging empty ammo boxes became ovens, and bayonets doubled as skewers. You're picturing a modern kitchen microwaves. Spice is not this desperate alchemy. Another joke. What's a soldier's favorite recipe? whatever doesn't explode. Some men traded tricks with enemies during truces, swapping curry tips for tea brews. You're thinking of that Canadian bacon hearty. Simple while this pate's a crafty triumph over hunger. Night's creeping in, and you're licking the spoon. The fire's glow dimming. Rats scurry, drawn by the food's scent, and you're swatting them off. A quirky story floats up some soldiers carved spoons from shell casings, turning war's debris into dinnerware. You're wondering how these men kept their wit, dreaming of home kitchens while cooking in mud. The trench is quiet, save for a Tommy's hum and the wind's sigh. Another soft joke, what's a trench cook's favorite hobby? Inventing. Because every meal's a miracle, you're starting to see why these hacks were more than survival. They were acts of defiance, a taste of creativity in the Somm's grim grind. The stars are hidden by smoke, and you're pulling your coat tighter, the empty tin at your feet. You're exhausted, your fingers greasy, but the men around you are already planning tomorrow's fight. You're thinking of that Indian curry fiery, bold while this meal's a quiet victory. The trench's chill bites, but the pate's warmth lingers. Proof you're still here. You're picturing those Russian turnips bitter, scavenged, wishing for another bite. Carrying you through the Somme night, one clever spoonful at a time. You're still in that Somme trench, the faint warmth of improvised pate fading as you huddle in a damp corner near Ypres. 1917, where food shortages grip soldiers tight. The air's heavy with mud's stench and the distant thud of shells. And you're clutching a half-empty tin of bully beef. Its contents barely a meal. Your stomach's growling louder than the artillery, and you're scraping every last shred, wondering how hunger became the real enemy. By 1917, blockades and strained supply lines cut rations across fronts, with some British units surviving on under 2,000 calories daily, half a soldier's needs. A quirky tidbit, some Tommies swore they saw soldiers eating leather belts, boiled soft in desperation. Historians still debate whether food shortages broke army spirits or forced them to fight harder for survival. You're leaning against a sandbag, the trench walls crumbling, as a Scottish private beside you, his kilt muddy, splits a stale biscuit, his face gaunt. He mutters about Glasgow's fish suppers, his voice hollow, and you're sharing the beef, its grease slick on your fingers. A quiet chuckle hits you. Why don't soldiers play grocer? Because their shelves are always bare. You're chewing slowly, the meat's saltiness sharp, and you're wondering how this scrap keeps you standing through Ypres' hell. The trench shakes with a shell's blast, and you're ducking low, the tin clutched tight. Shortages meant rations were stretched. Bully beef tins split among 4 men, biscuits crumbled to dust. You're picturing a modern fridge pizza, soda not this pitiful portion. Another joke. What's a soldier's favorite feast? One that exists. Some men scavenged shell craters for dropped tins. But you're rationing this beef. Each bite a calculation. You're thinking of that Canadian bacon hearty, filling while this meal's a whisper of sustenance. Night's settling in, and you're licking the tin clean. The fire's glow gone. Rats are bold now, sniffing your empty tin, and you're kicking them away. A quirky story floats up, some soldiers traded socks for a French farmer's eggs. A rare protein hit. You're wondering how these men kept going, dreaming of full plates while starving in mud. The trench is silent, save for a private's cough and the rain's patter. Another soft joke. What's a hungry soldier's hobby? Counting crumbs, because it's all they've got. You're starting to see why shortages were more than hunger. They were a test of will, a bite of endurance in Ypres' grim slog. The stars are lost in clouds, and you're wrapping your coat tighter, the empty tin at your feet. You're exhausted. Your stomach's still aching, but the men around you are bracing for dawn's fight. You're thinking of that Indian curry spicy, scarce while this beef's a fading memory. The trench's chill bites deeper, but the meal's faint salt lingers. Proof you're still here. You're picturing those Russian turnips desperate, cold wishing for anything more, carrying you through the Ypres night, one meager bite at a time. You're still shivering in that Ypres trench. The sting of hunger from scarce bully beef gnawing at you as you shuffle into a British supply depot near Cambrai. 1917. The air's thick with the metallic clank of crates and the faint smell of preserved meat. And you're hauling a tin of corned beef. Its label faded but promising. Your hands are cold, gripping the tin, and you're marveling at how these cans became a lifeline for millions. Tinned food, from bully beef to sardines, revolutionized wartime feeding, with over 5 million tons of canned goods sustaining Allied troops by war's end. You're wondering if this tin will taste like salvation, or just more trench monotony, a quirky tidbit some soldiers swore their tins were packed with mystery meat. Joking, it was anything from horse to boot leather. Historians still debate whether tinned rations were a logistical marvel or a culinary curse that dulled soldiers' spirits. You're crouched by a stack of crates, the depot's lanterns flickering, as a Cockney quartermaster hands you a can opener, his grin wide despite the mud on his boots. The beef's familiar salty, greasy, but it's reliable. Unlike fresh food that rots in transit. A quiet chuckle hits you. Why don't soldiers play canned food critic? Because every time's a gamble. You're spreading the meat on a biscuit, its texture mushy, and you're wondering how this kept armies marching through Cambrai's chaos. The depot hums with distant shell fire, and you're ducking behind a crate. The tin's weight a comfort. Canning factories in Britain churned out millions of tins, shipped across the channel to feed trenches. You're picturing a modern supermarket canned soups. Peaches, not this wartime staple. Another joke, what's a soldier's favorite tin? One that's full. Some men heated their beef with looted French wine for flavor. But you're eating it cold, the grease coating your lips. You're thinking of that Ypres, hunger raw. Desperate while this tin's a small victory. Night's creeping in, and you're licking the tin clean. The depot's glow dimming. Rats scurry, drawn by the meat's scent, and you're swatting them off. A quirky story floats up some Tommies carved love notes on empty tins, hoping they'd reach home. You're wondering how these men kept their hope, dreaming of roasts while eating canned slop. The depot's quiet, save for a soldier's cough and the creak of crates. Another soft joke, what's a tinned food fan's hobby? Collecting lids, because they're proof you ate. You're starting to see why tinned food was more than sustenance. It was a thread of stability, a bite of certainty in Cambrai's grim grind. The stars are dim through the smoke, and you're wrapping your scarf tighter. The empty tin at your feet. You're exhausted, your fingers slick with grease. But the men around you are already sorting tomorrow's rations. You're thinking of that Indian curry fiery, scarce while this beef's a steady anchor. The depot's chill bites, but the meal's salt lingers. proof you're still here. You're picturing those Russian kashapots meager, grim wishing for another tin, carrying you through the Cambrai night, one canned bite at a time. You've left the clanking supply depot near Cambrai, the greasy tang of tinned beef still on your lips as you slip into a British command post near Arras, 1917. The air's thick with tobacco smoke and the faint clink of cutlery, and you're eyeing a table set with a spread that's a cut above trench slop fresh bread, a slab of cheese, even a bottle of wine. Officers in World War I often ate better than enlisted men, enjoying perks like private cooks and priority supplies. Your mouth waters at the sight, and you're wondering why the brass gets this while Tommies gnaw hardtack. Over 10% of British rations were allocated to officers' messes, ensuring they dined in relative comfort. A quirky tidbit, some officers carried personal tea sets, sipping Darjeeling while shells fell nearby. Historians still debate whether officers' fancier fare boosted their leadership or deepened the rift with frontline troops. You're standing by a canvas tent, the post's lanterns casting a warm glow, as a major in a pressed uniform offers you a slice of bread, his mustache twitching with a smile. The bread's soft, almost fluffy, a world away from that Russian kasha's grit. You're spreading cheese on it, its tang sharp, and it's like a hug from home. A quiet chuckle hits you. Why don't officers play mess hall chef? Because their food's too posh for the trenches. You're sipping the wine, its warmth spreading, and you're wondering how this luxury exists in Arras's chaos. The tent flaps with a shell's distant rumble, and you're ducking closer to the table, the cheese's scent grounding you. Officers' cooks scavenged local farms for eggs or meat, turning basic rations into feasts. You're picturing a modern steakhouse ribeyes. Fry's not this, but it's close. Another joke, what's an officer's favorite ration? One that comes with a napkin. Some majors shared their food with enlisted men. But you're just a guest here, savoring the rare treat. You're thinking of that Cambrai tinned beef reliable. Grim while this spreads a fleeting privilege. Night's falling, and you're finishing the bread. The tent's glow softening. Flies buzz, drawn by the cheese, and you're swatting them off. A quirky story floats up. Some officers hosted trench dinners, inviting privates for morale, though the wine rarely reached the ranks. You're wondering how these men balance duty and comfort, dreaming of London clubs while eating in mud. The post's quiet, save for a captain's laugh and the wind's sigh. Another soft joke, what's an officer's favorite hobby? Dining. Because it's their only promotion. You're starting to see why officers' meals were more than food. They were a taste of hierarchy, a bite of control in Arras's grim fight. The stars are dim through the canvas, and you're pulling your coat tighter, the empty plate at your feet. You're tired, your mouth still rich with cheese. But the officers around you are planning tomorrow's push. You're thinking of that Ypres hunger raw, desperate while this meal's a guilty pleasure. The tense chill creeps in, but the wine's warmth lingers. Proof you're still here. You're picturing those Indian curries spicy, scarce wishing for another slice, carrying you through the Arras night, one posh bite at a time. You've slipped away from the officer's lavish spread in that Arras command post. The cheese's tang fading as you find yourself in a muddy trench near the Somme. Christmas 1916. The air's crisp with frost and the faint crackle of a fire, and you're gathered around a makeshift table with British Tommies, sharing a rare holiday feast. Your hands are wrapped around a tin mug of hot tea, and you're eyeing a spread of tinned plum pudding and extra bully beef. A festive treat in the grim trenches. Holiday meals, especially Christmas, brought brief respite, with over 100,000 special ration packs sent to British troops for the 1916 season. A quirky tidbit, some soldiers claimed their pudding tins were labeled trench cake, meant to survive shell fire and sentiment. Historians still debate whether these feasts lifted spirits or deepened the ache for home. You're crouched by the fire, the trench walls glinting with ice, as a Tommy beside you, his scarf tight, carves the pudding, grinning about his mum's holiday roast. The pudding's dense, sweet with raisins, a stark contrast to that Ypres hunger's bite. A quiet chuckle hits you. Why don't Tommies play Santa? Because their gifts are all tinned. You're spooning the pudding, its warmth spreading, and you're wondering how this fleeting joy fuels men through the Psalms cold. The trench hums with a distant carol, and you're huddling closer to the fire. The tea's steam warming your face. Extra rations came from home front drives, with families sending parcels to boost morale. You're picturing a modern Christmas turkey. Pie, not this wartime treat. Another joke, what's a soldier's favorite holiday, one with seconds? Some men share the beef with French locals, but you're savoring the pudding, its stickiness a comfort. You're thinking of that Arras officer's cheese posh. Unfair, while this feast feels like a shared victory. Night settling in, and you're licking the spoon. The fire's glow dimming. Rats scurry, drawn by the sweet crumbs, and you're kicking them away. A quirky story floats up. Some Tommies sang Silent Night with Germans across no man's land. Sharing pudding scraps, you're wondering how these men found hope, dreaming of family tables while eating in mud. The trench is quiet, save for a soldier's hum and the wind's sigh. Another soft joke, what's a holiday soldier's hobby? Singing? Because it fills the belly too. You're starting to see why these feasts were more than food, they were a spark of peace. A bite of joy in the Psalm's grim night. The stars twinkle through the frost, and you're pulling your coat tighter, the empty mug at your feet. You're tired, your mouth still sweet. But the men around you are already bracing for dawn's patrol. You're thinking of that Cambrai tinned beef steady, dull while this pudding's a rare gift. The trench's chill bites, but the tea's warmth lingers. Proof you're still here. You're picturing those Indian curries fiery, scarce wishing for another spoonful, carrying you through the Christmas night, one festive bite at a time. You've left the festive warmth of that Christmas pudding in the Somme trench, the sweet raisins a fading memory as you hunker down in a British dugout near Passchendaele. 1917. The air's damp, reeking of mud and sweat, and you're sharing a tin of bully beef with a weary Tommy. His eyes brightening as he talks about food's power to lift spirits. Your stomach's growling, and you're scooping the greasy meat onto a biscuit, savoring its saltiness like a lifeline. Food wasn't just fuel in World War I. It was a morale booster. With over 80% of soldiers' letters home mentioning meals as a source of comfort. You're wondering how this simple tin keeps hope alive in Passchendaele's mire. A quirky tidbit, some Tommies wrote poems about bully beef, calling it their trench sweetheart. Historians still debate whether food's psychological lift outweighed the monotony of repetitive rations. You're sitting on a crate, the dugout's walls slick, as the Tommy passes you a mug of tea, joking about his mum's Sunday roasts, making this slop seem like sin. The beef's familiar, its fat coating your tongue. But today, it feels like a gift. A quiet chuckle hits you. Why don't soldiers play food critic? Because their hearts are fuller than their plates. You're sipping the tea, its warmth cutting the chill. And you're amazed how this meal sparks laughter amid the mud. The dugout shakes with a shell's rumble, and you're huddling closer to a candle's flicker. The biscuits crunch loud in the gloom. Food parcels from home jam. Biscuits were morale gold, often shared among mates. You're picturing a modern pizza cheesy. Hot, not this wartime staple. Another joke, what's a Tommy's favorite mood? Hungry. Because it makes every bite sing. Some men sang songs about food, but you're focused on the beef. It's salt, a reminder of life. You're thinking of that Somme holiday pudding sweet. Rare, while this meal's a daily anchor. Night's creeping in, and you're licking the tin clean. The candles glow dimming. Rats scurry, drawn by the grease, and you're swatting them off. A quirky story floats up. Some soldiers name their rations, like Betsy the Beef, to make meals feel personal. You're wondering how these men stayed upbeat, dreaming of feasts while eating scraps. The dugout's quiet, save for a soldier's sigh and the rain's patter. Another soft joke, what's a soldier's favorite hobby? Chewing. Because it's their only applause. You're starting to see why food was more than sustenance. It was a spark of joy, a bite of resilience in Passchendaele's slog. The stars are hidden by clouds, and you're wrapping your coat tighter, the empty tin at your feet. You're tired, your mouth salty, but the men around you are swapping tales of home kitchens. You're thinking of that Arras officer's cheese posh, distant while this beef's a shared triumph. The trench's chill bites, but the tea's warmth lingers, proof you're still here. You're picturing those Indian curries, spicy, bold, wishing for another scoop, carrying you through the Passchendaele night, one hearty bite at a time. You're still huddled in that Passchendaele dugout, the salty warmth of bully beef fading as you trudge through a German trench near Verdun. 1916, where starvation's grip tightens. The air's thick with smoke and the sour stench of decay. And you're clutching a crust of black bread, its edges moldy, barely enough to dull the hunger gnawing at your bones. Your hands tremble as you break off a piece, and you're wondering how soldiers survive when food runs dry. By 1916, German blockades and crop failures slashed rations, with some units surviving on under 500 calories daily, leading to widespread malnutrition. A quirky tidbit, some soldiers boiled shoe leather into a grim broth, claiming it tricked their stomachs. Historians still debate whether starvation weakened Germany's armies more than enemy bullets. You're leaning against a crumbling trench wall, the mud seeping through your coat, as a German soldier beside you, his face skeletal, shares a sliver of sausage, his voice low about Berlin's markets. The bread's bitter, the mold scraped off, but you're chewing desperately, its grit sanding your teeth. A quiet chuckle hits you. Why don't soldiers play grocer? Because their shop's always out of stock. You're swallowing the sausage, its fat a fleeting spark, and you're wondering how this scrap keeps men fighting Verdun's hell. The trench rattles with a shell's blast, and you're ducking low, the bread clutched tight. Hunger drove men to desperation, stealing from comrades, scavenging corpses' packs. You're picturing a modern kitchen pasta, fruit, not this pitiful crust. Another joke, what's a soldier's favorite meal, one that isn't a rumor? Some men chewed grass to fill their bellies. But you're rationing the sausage. Each bite a lifeline. You're thinking of that Passchendaele bully beef greasy. Reliable while this meal's a ghost of sustenance. Night's falling, and you're nibbling the last crumb. The trench's gloom deepening. Rats are bold, sniffing your hands, and you're kicking them away. A quirky story floats up. Some Germans traded buttons for a French farmer's potato. A fleeting taste of life. You're wondering how these men held on, dreaming of feasts while starving in mud. The trench is silent, save for a soldier's groan and the wind's howl. Another soft joke, what's a starving soldier's hobby, hoping? Because it's their only flavor. You're starting to see why hunger was more than pain. It was a cruel test. A bite of defiance in Verdun's grim fight. The stars are lost in smoke, and you're wrapping your scarf tighter, the empty hands at your side. You're exhausted, your stomach a hollow ache. But the men around you are bracing for dawn's patrol. You're thinking of that Somme holiday pudding sweet, distant while this bread's a fading memory. The trench's chill bites deeper, but the sausage's faint fat lingers. Proof you're still here. You're picturing those Indian curries spicy, scarce wishing for anything more, carrying you through the Verdun night, one meager bite at a time. You've stumbled out of Verdun's starving German trench, the moldy bread's bitterness fading as you find yourself in a muddy village behind the Western Front. 1917, where home front parcels are unloaded. The air's thick with dust and the faint sweetness of jam. And you're tearing open a package from a British family. Its contents a treasure of biscuits and tinned fruit. Your hands are shaky, eager for a taste of home. And you're wondering how these gifts keep soldiers going. Over 2 million food parcels were sent to British troops by 1917. A lifeline from loved ones battling their own shortages. A quirky tidbit, some parcels included handwritten recipes. As if mums thought their boys could whip up a roast in a trench. Historians still debate whether home front parcels boosted morale more than army rations or deepened the ache for peace. You're crouched by a crate, the village's church steeple leaning from shell fire, as a Tommy beside you, his cap askew, reads a letter tucked in his parcel, grinning about his sister's baking. The biscuits are crumbly, laced with currants, a world away from that Verdun hunger's claw. A quiet chuckle hits you. Why don't soldiers play postman? Because they'd eat the mail. You're popping a peach slice from the tin, its syrupy sweetness bursting. And you're marveling how this taste of England survives the war's grind. The village hums with a distant barrage, and you're ducking behind the crate. The parcel's wrapping clutched tight. Families sent jam, chocolate, even sausages, often pooling scarce rations to support the front. You're picturing a modern care package cookies, chips, not this wartime haul. Another joke, what's a soldier's favorite delivery? One that beats the shells. Some men share their parcels, but you're savoring the peach. Its juice dripping. You're thinking of that Passchendaele bully beef salty, grim while this fruit's a bright spark of love. Night's creeping in, and you're nibbling the last biscuit. The village's lanterns dimming. Flies buzz, drawn by the syrup, and you're swatting them off. A quirky story floats up. Some Tommies sent empty tins back home, etched with thanks. A cycle of care. You're wondering how these men kept their hope, dreaming of kitchen tables while eating in ruins. The village is quiet, save for a soldier's laugh and the wind's sigh. Another soft joke, what's a parcel soldier's hobby unwrapping? Because it's Christmas every time. You're starting to see why home front food was more than sustenance. It was a thread to family, a bite of heart in the war's chaos. The stars are dim through the smoke, and you're wrapping your coat tighter. The empty tin at your feet. You're tired. Your mouth's still sweet. But the men around you are swapping parcel tales. You're thinking of that Verdun starvation raw. Cruel, while this peach is a quiet triumph. The village's chill bites, but the biscuit's warmth lingers. Proof you're still here. You're picturing those Indian curries spicy, scarce wishing for another slice. Carrying you through the night, one loving gift at a time. You've left the sweet glow of home front parcels in that shelled village. The peach's syrupy tang fading as you slip into a shadowy trench near Eisen. 1917, where whispered deals unfold. The air's thick with mud stench and the faint rustle of illicit trades. And you're bartering a tin of bully beef for a French soldier's cigarette. Your hands are steady, clutching the tin, and you're wondering how black market bites keep hunger at bay. Black market trading thrived in World War I, with soldiers swapping food for smokes or booze. Despite strict regulations, over 10% of trench rations reportedly fueled these underground deals by 1917. A quirky tidbit, some Tommies traded jam for German schnapps during truces, calling it trench diplomacy. Historians still debate whether black markets sustained soldiers or undermined army discipline. You're crouched by a flickering candle, the trench walls damp, as a poilu beside you, his mustache twitching, offers a crusty bread loaf for your beef. He mutters about Paris cafes, his eyes sharp, and you're splitting the tin, its grease gleaming. A quiet chuckle hits you. Why don't soldiers play merchant? Because their shop's a shell hole. You're biting the bread, its staleness softened by the beef's salt, and you're marveling how this swap feels like a feast. The trench shakes with a shell's rumble, and you're ducking low, the cigarette's smoke curling. Trades where risky officers cracked down, but hunger trumped rules. You're picturing a modern flea market vintage finds. Snacks, not this desperate barter. Another joke, what's a soldier's favorite deal? One that fills the belly. Some men swapped socks for eggs, but you're savoring the bread. It's chew a small win. You're thinking of those home front biscuits sweet, loving while this trade's a gritty survival. Night's falling, and you're puffing the cigarette. The trench's gloom deepening. Rats scurry, drawn by the beef's scent, and you're kicking them away. A quirky story floats up. Some soldiers swapped fake tins of mud, tricking greedy traders. You're wondering how these men kept their wits, dreaming of markets while bartering in mud. The trench is quiet, save for a poilu's cough and the wind's moan. Another soft joke, what's a black market soldier's hobby? Haggling. Because every bite's a battle. You're starting to see why these trades were more than food. They were a spark of cunning, a bite of control in Eisner's chaos. The stars are lost in smoke, and you're wrapping your scarf tighter, the empty tin at your feet. You're tired, your mouth salty, but the men around you are already plotting tomorrow's deals. You're thinking of that Verdun starvation raw, grim while this bread's a sly triumph. The trench's chill bites, but the cigarette's warmth lingers. Proof you're still here. You're picturing those Anzac biscuits, crisp, sweet, wishing for another trade. carrying you through the Eisen night, one bartered bite at a time. You've slipped away from the smoky deals of that Eisen trench. The traded bread staleness fading as you find yourself in a grim German prisoner of war camp near Lille. 1917. The air's heavy with damp straw and the faint stench of unwashed bodies. And you're clutching a tin bowl of watery gruel. Its grayish slop barely food. Your stomach's a hollow ache. And you're spooning the thin mixture, wondering how captured soldiers survive on this. Prisoners' diets in World War I were meager, often just bread scraps and broth, with Allied POWs in German camps receiving under 200 calories daily. A quirky tidbit, some prisoners claimed they ate dandelion leaves, plucked from camp yards, to stave off scurvy. Historians still debate whether POW starvation was deliberate cruelty or a byproduct of Germany's own food shortages. You're sitting on a splintered bench, the camp's barbed wire glinting under a weak sun. As a British POW beside you, his uniform ragged, mutters about London's fish and chips. The gruel's tasteless, like wet cardboard, but you're swallowing it. The spoon scraping the tin. A quiet chuckle hits you. Why don't POWs play chef because their menu's misery? You're chewing a crust of stale bread, its texture like sawdust. And you're wondering how this keeps men alive in Lille's despair. The camp hums with a guard's shout. And you're huddling closer to the bowl, its faint warmth a fleeting comfort. Red Cross parcels biscuits, tinned milk were rare lifelines, but often pilfered by guards. You're picturing a modern soup kitchen hot stew. Bread, not this grim slop. Another joke. What's a prisoner's favorite dish? One that's not a dream. Some men hoard crumbs for barter, but you're eating every drop. The gruel's thinness mocking your hunger. You're thinking of that Eisen black market beef salty, illicit while this bowl's a cruel shadow. Night's creeping in, and you're scraping the bowl clean. The camp's lanterns dimming. Rats scurry, drawn by the faint food smell, and you're swatting them off. A quirky story floats up. Some POWs carve chess pieces from bread, playing games to forget their hunger. You're wondering how these men held on, dreaming of feasts while eating scraps. The camp's silent, save for a prisoner's cough and the wind's moan. Another soft joke. What's a POW's favorite hobby? Waiting. Because food's always late, you're starting to see why these meals were more than sustenance. They were a stubborn will, a sip of survival in Lille's grim cage. The stars are dim through the barracks cracks, and you're wrapping your blanket tighter, the empty bowl at your feet. You're exhausted, your stomach still growling, but the men around you are whispering of escape. You're thinking of those home front biscuits, sweet, loving while this gruel's a bitter necessity. The camp's chill bites, but the broth's faint warmth lingers. Proof you're still here. You're picturing those Indian curries spicy, scarce wishing for anything more. Carrying you through the Lille night, one thin spoonful at a time. You've left the grim slop of that Lille POW camp, the watery gruel's chill fading as you find yourself in a bustling British field hospital near Amiens. 9:18. The air's sharp with antiseptic and the faint warmth of broth. And you're spooning a bowl of thin soup, its steam a gentle comfort against your bandaged arm. Your body aches, and you're savoring the soup's mild flavor, wondering how these meals aid recovery. Wounded soldiers in World War I relied on hospital diets, soups, milk, and soft bread to regain strength, with over 1 million Allied casualties receiving specialized rations. A quirky tidbit: some nurses slipped chocolate into patients' broth, claiming it healed the soul. Historians still debate whether hospital diets sped recovery or merely kept the wounded alive amid overstretched resources. You're propped on a cot, the hospital tent flapping in the breeze, as a nurse beside you, her apron stained, checks your chart, joking about her mom's chicken soup being better medicine. The soup's light barley, a hint of carrot easy on your battered stomach. A quiet chuckle hits you. Why don't wounded play chef because their kitchen's a bandage? You're sipping slowly, the warmth spreading, and you're amazed how this simple bowl feels like hope after Amiens' chaos. The tent hums with a patient's groan, and you're leaning back, the bowl's heat soothing your hands. Hospitals prioritized nutrition, but shortages meant meals were often just broth and bread. You're picturing a modern hospital trade Jell-O. Juice, not this wartime fare. Another joke: what's a patient's favorite spice? Patience, because healing's slow. Some nurses mashed bread into the soup for extra calories, but you're drinking it plain. The barley's softness a relief. You're thinking of that Lille POW gruel, tasteless, cruel, while this soup's a quiet lifeline. Night's settling in, and you're finishing the broth. The tent's lanterns dimming. Flies buzz, drawn by the food's scent, and you're swatting them weakly. A quirky story floats up: some wounded traded their bread for soldiers' cigarettes, a fleeting escape from pain. You're wondering how these men clung to life, dreaming of feasts while sipping broth. The tent's quiet, save for a nurse's hum and the wind's sigh. Another soft joke: what's a wounded soldier's hobby? Sipping. Because every spoonful's a step forward. You're starting to see why hospital diets were more than food. They were a thread to recovery, a sip of strength in Amiens' grim care. The stars are dim through the tent's flaps, and you're pulling your blanket tighter, the empty bowl at your side. You're exhausted, your wounds throbbing, but the nurses around you are tending others. You're thinking of that Eisen black market bread stale, bartered while this soup's a gentle triumph. The tent's chill bites, but the broth's warmth lingers, proof you're still here. You're picturing those Indian curries, spicy, distant, wishing for another spoonful, carrying you through the Amiens night. One healing sip at a time. You've drifted from the gentle warmth of that Amiens hospital broth, the barley's softness fading as you find yourself aboard a British warship in the North Sea. 1916, swaying with the waves, the air's salty, laced with coal smoke and the greasy scent of cooking. And you're balancing a tin tray of boiled beef and potatoes, its steam rising in the cramped mess deck. Your stomach sways with the ship, and you're digging into the meal, wondering how sailors eat amid the Jutland's chaos. Naval diets in World War I were heartier than trench rations, with sailors consuming over 3,000 calories daily to fuel grueling shifts, totaling 500,000 tons of food for the Royal Navy. A quirky tidbit: some sailors swore their beef was pickled in brine so strong it could strip paint off the hull. Historians still debate whether naval diet sustained morale or just kept sailors from mutinying over endless boiled meals. You're wedged at a narrow table, the ship's hum vibrating as a sailor beside you, his cap greasy, jokes about his mom's roast lamb being worth deserting for. The beef's tough, salty from its brine bath, but the potatoes are soft, soaking up the gravy. A quiet chuckle hits you. Why don't sailors play cook? Because their kitchen's a rolling pot. You're chewing slowly, the meal steadying your seasick gut. And you're amazed how this fare fuels men through storms and shells. The deck lurches with a wave, and you're gripping the tray, the gravy sloshing. Ship kitchens, or galleys, churned out hot meals. But storms often meant cold rations. You're picturing a modern cruise buffet, shrimp. Desserts, not this wartime slop. Another joke, what's a sailor's favorite dish, one that stays on the plate? Some men spice their beef with looted condiments, but you're eating it plain, the salt sharp. You're thinking of that Amiens hospital soup light. Healing while this meal's a heavy anchor. Night's falling, and you're scraping the tray clean, the mess deck's lanterns swaying. Rats scurry, drawn by the grease, and you're shooing them off. A quirky story floats up. Some sailors traded potatoes for German prisoners' trinkets, a salty barter at sea. You're wondering how these men kept their grit, dreaming of portside pubs while eating below deck. The ship's quiet, save for a sailor's whistle and the waves crash. Another soft joke, what's a sailor's favorite hobby eating? Because it's smoother than the sea. You're starting to see why naval meals were more than food, they were a rhythm of survival. A bite of stability in Jutland's wild waves. The stars are hidden by clouds, and you're wrapping your coat tighter, the empty tray at your feet. You're tired, your mouth salty, but the men around you are gearing up for the night watch. You're thinking of that Lille POW gruel grim, thin while this beef's a sailor's triumph. The ship's chill bites, but the meal's warmth lingers. Proof you're still here. You're picturing those Indian curries spicy, scarce wishing for another forkful, carrying you through the North Sea night, one hearty bite at a time. You've left the swaying mess deck of that North Sea warship, the salty beef's heft fading as you find yourself back in a muddy trench near Cambrai. 1917, where soldiers from different nations swap bites of unfamiliar rations. The air's thick with smoke and the faint tang of foreign spices. And you're chewing a chunk of German black bread, its sourness jarring after a British Tommy's offer of jam. Your stomach churns at the clash of flavors, and you're wondering how soldiers handle these strange tastes. Cultural food exchanges were common in World War I, with over 20% of troops encountering Allied or enemy rations through trades or captures. A quirky tidbit, some British soldiers tried French snails, spitting them out while poilus laughed. Historians still debate whether these exchanges built camaraderie or just highlighted how alien war made everyone feel. You're crouched by a flickering fire, the trench walls slick as a French poilu beside you. His cap tilted, offers a sip of wine for your bully beef. He grimaces at the beef's grease, muttering about Parisian bistros, and you're struggling with the bread's grit. A quiet chuckle hits you. Why don't soldiers play food critic? Because every bite's a culture shock. You're spreading jam on the bread, its sweetness fighting the sourness, and you're amazed how this mix sparks laughs amid Cambrai's gloom. The trench shakes with a shell's rumble, and you're ducking low, the wine's tang lingering. Trades happen during lulls, with Italians offering pasta scraps or Indians sharing chili-laced lentils. You're picturing a modern food court tacos, sushi, not this wartime swap. Another joke, what's a soldier's favorite fusion? One that doesn't taste like regret. Some men gagged on unfamiliar spices, but you're chewing through the jam of faint comfort. You're thinking of that naval beef hearty, salty while this bread's a jarring puzzle. Night's creeping in, and you're sipping the wine. The fire's glow dimming. Rats scurry, drawn by the jam's sweetness, and you're kicking them away. A quirky story floats up: some Tommies swapped bully beef for German sausages, only to find them stuffed with sawdust. You're wondering how these men bonded over food, dreaming of home while tasting the enemy's world. The trench is quiet, save for a poilu's hum and the wind's sigh. Another soft joke: what's a soldier's favorite hobby? Swapping, because every bite's a story. You're starting to see why these exchanges were more than food. They were a bridge across cultures, a bite of connection in Cambray's grim fight. The stars are dim through the smoke, and you're wrapping your coat tighter. The empty bread crust at your feet. You're tired, your mouth a mix of sweet and sour. But the men around you are swapping more tales. You're thinking of that amiens, hospital broth, gentle, healing while this trade's a bold experiment. The trench's chill bites, but the wine's warmth lingers. Proof you're still here. You're picturing those Indian curries fiery, scarce wishing for another swap, carrying you through the Cambrai night, one shared bite at a time. You've left the clashing flavors of that Cambrai trench swap, the German bread sourness fading as you stand in a quiet French village square near Rums. Teen 999, where the war's scars linger. The air's soft with spring and the faint smell of fresh bread. And you're biting into a warm baguette, its crust crackling, a taste of peace. Your hands are steady, holding the loaf. And you're reflecting on how World War I's food shaped diets long after the guns fell silent. The war's rationing and canning innovations influenced global food industries. With over 10 billion cans produced worldwide by 1920, a legacy of trench survival. A quirky tidbit: some soldiers kept bully beef tins as souvenirs, using them as lunchboxes in peacetime. Historians still debate whether the war's food shortages spurred culinary creativity or entrenched reliance on processed foods. You're leaning against a stone fountain, the village bustling with rebuilding. As a former poilu beside you, his coat patched, shares a chunk of cheese, talking about how wartime hunger changed his family's recipes. The baguette's chewy, a world away from that naval beef's brine. A quiet chuckle hits you. Why don't veterans play baker? Because their bread's too full of memories. You're savoring the cheese's tang, its richness grounding, and you're wondering how food carries war's echoes into peace. The square hums with the cart's rattle, and you're brushing crumbs off your coat. The fountains spray cool. Wartime canning led to post-war convenience foods, while rationing taught frugality, shaping meals from London to Lyon. You're picturing a modern grocery aisle: canned soups, frozen dinners, not this fresh loaf. Another joke: what's a veteran's favorite flavor? Survival, because it's in every bite. Some villagers still hoard tinned goods, but you're eating the baguette plain, its simplicity a triumph. You're thinking of that Cambrai food swap, strange, gritty while this bread's a clean start. Night's creeping in, and you're finishing the cheese. The village's lanterns glowing, sparrows flutter, pecking at crumbs, and you're shooing them gently. A quirky story floats up: some soldiers taught their kids to love tinned sardines, a wartime taste passed down. You're wondering how these men rebuilt, dreaming of feasts while baking anew. The square's quiet, save for a child's laugh and the breeze's sigh. Another soft joke: what's a post-war hobby? Eating, because it's finally free. You're starting to see why food's legacy was more than sustenance. It was a bridge to normalcy, a bite of healing in Reem's fragile peace. The stars twinkle above the village, and you're wrapping your scarf tighter, the empty hands at your side. You're tired, your mouth still rich with cheese. But the villagers around you are planning tomorrow's market. You're thinking of that Lille POW gruel grim, thin while this baguette's a quiet victory. The night's chill bites, but the bread's warmth lingers. Proof you're still here. You're picturing those Indian curries fiery, scarce wishing for another slice, carrying you through the Ramps night, one fresh bite at a time. You're still lingering in that peaceful Reims village square, the baguette's fresh chew of fading comfort as you sit on a grassy knoll overlooking the Marne. 1920s, where the scars of war soften into memory. The air's warm with summer's hum and the faint rustle of poppies. And you're holding a small loaf of bread, its crust dusted with flour, a symbol of the stories soldiers' meals tell. You're tearing off a piece, its texture soft, and you're pondering how food remains a link to World War I's grit and grace. Over 1 million veterans worldwide carried wartime food habits into civilian life, shaping how nations eat and remember. A quirky tidbit, some British Tommies kept brewing tea in old trench mugs, claiming it tasted of courage. You're starting to see why these echoes matter, wondering how a simple bite carries a century's weight. Historians still debate whether food's wartime role is best remembered as survival or a quiet art of endurance. You're leaning back on the grass, the river glinting below, as a former doughboy beside you, his hat worn, shares a tin of sardines, reminiscing about campfires and chocolate bars. The bread's mild, pairing with the sardines' saltiness. A nod to those trench trades, a quiet chuckle hits you. Why don't veterans play historian? Because their meals tell the story. You're chewing slowly, the flavors grounding, and you're amazed how these tastes weave past and present. The knoll sways with a breeze, and you're brushing crumbs from your shirt, the poppies nodding. Food museums now preserve bully beef tins, while recipes born in trenches like Anzac biscuits live on. You're picturing a modern picnic sandwiches. Lemonade, not this humble spread. Another joke, what's a veteran's favorite legacy? A full plate, because it's their victory. Some families still bake wartime bread, but you're savoring this loaf. Its simplicity eternal. You're thinking of that Reims baguette fresh, hopeful while this meal's a timeless thread. Night settling in, and you're finishing the sardines. The stars emerging above. Crickets chirp, drawn by the crumbs, and you're letting them be. A quirky story floats up. Some veterans planted poppy seeds from Flanders, their gardens a tribute to trench meals. You're wondering how these stories endure, tying us to soldiers' hunger and heart. The knoll's quiet, save for the doughboy's hum and the river's flow. Another soft joke, what's a soldier's final hobby? Eating, because it's their piece. You're starting to see why food's echoes are more than memory. They're a taste of humanity, a bite of forever in the Marne's gentle night. The stars shine bright, and you're wrapping your scarf tighter. The empty tin at your side. You're tired, your mouth still salty, but the world around you feels alive with stories. You're thinking of that Lille POW gruel desperate, thin while this bread's a lasting gift. The night's chill brushes you, but the meal's warmth lingers. Proof you're still here. You're picturing those Indian curries fiery, fleeting wishing for one more bite, carrying you through the Marne night. one eternal taste at a time. You're resting on that Marne knoll, the bread's soft warmth fading as the night wraps you in a quiet embrace. The poppies whispering of soldiers' meals long gone. From British bully beef's greasy grit to Indian curry's fiery spark, you've tasted the Great War's story one bite, one sip, one shared tin at a time. Each meal, whether a Tommy's hardtack or a Poilus wine-soaked bread, carried men through mud, fear, and hope, a fragile thread to home. You're breathing slower now, the river's murmur blending with a fan's soft hum as the war's echoes dissolve into a gentle haze. Those tins, those crumbs, they're more than history. They're proof of hearts that endured. Let the trenches fade, the hunger soften, and the stars above the Marne cradle you. You're safe, tucked in the present, where the only fight is for a cozy pillow. Drift now. Let the soldiers' stories settle like dust, their meals a quiet lullaby. Sleep deep, dreamer, and carry their resilience into your dreams.